Today feels like a good day to talk about Superman. Don't ask me why, it just does. No, of course, the new Superman movie, fittingly titled Superman, hits theaters officially today, and I'm excited to see it. I don't know if I'll see it for another couple of weeks just because of my schedule, but people seem to like it. And to coincide with the film's release, DC Comics put out a few different Superman issues this week, plus a new Supergirl issue. That's great, no complaints. And the best one of them all, in my opinion, was Superman Treasury 2025 Hero for All by Dan Jurgens and Bruno Redondo. So this is a tremendously oversized issue, about 70 to 80 pages, I think, about an alien invasion that affects the entire DCU, but ultimately it's about Superman and his place in the DCU. So Dan Jurgens wrote this, and Dan Jurgens is like a quintessential Superman writer and artist. He's worked on countless Superman stories over the last 3 decades or so, including, and perhaps most notably, The Death of Superman. So yeah, anytime his name shows up on a Superman story, it's at least worth a look. And you know what? Not for nothing, this just might be one of the best Superman stories he's ever done. Meanwhile, our artist Bruno Redondo and our colorist Adriano Lucas are just coming off an Eisner Award-winning run on Nightwing. They also produced this page during a run on Suicide Squad. So I was really excited to see them work on Superman for this extended project. Beautiful cover by Redondo and Lucas too, by the way. Kind of Christopher Reeve-ish. You know, this feels a little bit like one of those stories that Mark Waid writes for Dan Mora, in the sense that we not only have our focus and title characters, but we have like peripheral heroes from all across the DCU, and of course Bruno Redondo and Adriano Lucas get to work on all of them. It's a real treat in that sense. Jurgens even gets to do some pages himself from an art standpoint, as we flash back and look at some of Superman's history. I really like the way Lex Luthor is portrayed in this issue. You know, sometimes getting him right is equally as important as getting characters like Superman and Lois right. Ultimately, of course, this issue shows us that it's not Superman's powers that make him great and special. It's his soul and the love and the friendships and the relationships that he creates in his life. There's no better time to have a Superman story like that. This might just wind up being the best Superman comic to come out this year. It might even make its way onto my favorite comics of 2025 list that comes out in December. Stay tuned in that respect. When did Chuck E. Cheese lose his balls? It's probably not what I was supposed to be thinking about coming out of The Slasher's Apprentice number 3, but that's where I'm at. So there's a moment and a scene in this issue where the Hopton Valley Killer, our slasher, takes Riley, his new apprentice of sorts, into his base, his sanctuary. And it's like this abandoned Chuck E. Cheese type place, which is cool. And you know, to get into his sanctuary, they have to walk through the ball pit, or what used to be a ball pit. And you know, for me, that drudged up like an old bone I've got to pick with Chuck E. Cheese. They took the ball pits out of Chuck E. Cheese's, apparently. They don't have them anymore. I assume that's a casualty of COVID, because, hey, I'll admit, those things are basically giant petri dishes. But I don't know, the ball pit was like my favorite part of Chuck E. Cheese when I was a kid. And, you know, a few years ago when I took my kids for the first time and it wasn't there, I was like, oh, take your balls back, Chuck. A suggestion from an old friend. Naturally, the core of this story is the dynamic between the Hopton Valley Killer and Riley, you know, Slasher and Slasher's apprentice, so to speak. But, you know, she's depicted as being this young, techie girl, and as such, they're kind of teaching each other. Actually, she's teaching him, I think, more than he's teaching her. And maybe that'll be what ultimately becomes the undoing of their bond. I was really happy when I found out The Slasher's Apprentice is going to be 5 issues, as opposed to 4, because I've read a lot of 4-issue limited series books lately that just haven't hit the spot because I felt like they needed more room to breathe. So as we're getting 5 issues here, I'm hopeful that the Slasher's Apprentice winds up at least a step above some of those others in terms of quality. We will see. There's a trigger warning on the very first page of Krypto, The Last Dog of Krypton, number 2. Yeah, that's something you don't see every day. I mean, okay, technically they call it a content warning, but, you know, tomato, tomato, same thing. It's that little purple box there. You see it? So this issue is about how a preteen Lex Luthor owned Krypto the Superdog for a short time before Krypto was Clark Kent's dog. And if you come into this issue knowing that, you kind of get a sense of what the content they're warning you about is going to be. And indeed, on the second page, we do see Lex physically abuse the dog. I'm not going to show that to you, but the early pages of this issue have been released to the public, so they're out there if you want to see them. It's kind of interesting to me that they would choose to do this kind of thing now, like the same month that Krypto appears in the big Superman movie, and the world is in love with Krypto, and, oh, okay, let's do an issue where Lex Luthor beats the dog up. For the record, as somebody who has cared for rescue dogs over the course of his life, I was not hugely offended or, morally aghast by what this issue showed me with Lex and the dog. I mean, I didn't like it, but I think if you're going to go into that kind of territory, they went about as tamely as they could. Did they really need to go there? No, but I guess you can justify it by saying it serves its purpose in giving us a window into Lex's psyche and the way he thinks and how he kind of becomes what he's going to become. As far as the warning is concerned, even as somebody who is, full disclosure, pretty liberal in mind and heart, I tend to think there are a few too many trigger warnings in the world. I mean, we can discuss that at a later date if you want to. As far as the content warning itself is concerned, I can kind of take it or leave it in this instance. I mean, what they do is relatively tame, but they didn't exactly hurt themselves by putting it there, so it's whichever way you want to think about it. Incidentally, when I talked about the first issue, I mentioned Jay Lee and June Chung's cover and how they might not be the right artists to work on the covers for a book like this, just from a tonal perspective. But oddly enough, I do think that their art works for a Lex Luthor and Krypto cover. Go figure. So I've talked a decent amount about how One World Under Doom, Marvel's latest event comic, is basically a big allegory for Trumpism and Donald Trump's effect on the world at large in the last 10 years or so. Well, One World Under Doom number 6 just came out this week, and it's quite possibly our Trumpiest issue yet. For better or for worse. So in true political fashion, Reed Richards challenges Dr. Doom to a debate in this issue, like a nationally televised debate, and if Doom loses, he has to give up his power as, Emperor of the world. During the debate, we see Reed attack Dr. Doom with things like logic and reason and recent history, and Doom responds with, emotional attacks, attacks that appeal to the general public's emotions, and that's a strategy that the Trump side of the aisle knows pretty well, I think. Of course, the whole debate is a diversion for the Avengers to find some dirt on Dr. Doom, basically, find something incriminating, and they do, and what they find is, in my opinion, again, very Trumpy. I mean, not literally, but, you know, if Trump were a comic book supervillain, it feels like the kind of thing he would do. You know, Marvel is the biggest and most successful comic book publisher in the world right now. And, you know, given the position they're in, they really don't have to publish a story that's this relevant and, like, politically charged. But they did, and they are. And I give them a lot of credit for it. You know, I've said it a bunch of times, but I'll keep saying it so long as I believe it's true. One World Under Doom is the best event comic Marvel has produced since Civil War. Oh, and by the way, I love the cover to this issue with Dr. Doom tearing Reed Richards in half, literally. It's a fun visual. So generally speaking, it's considered rude and in bad taste to comment on another person's body in public. I mean, I know that. I know it would be especially inappropriate for me as a man to talk about a woman's body. You don't do that. But you know, I think I'm gonna risk it here and make a couple of comments. And I should be okay considering that the woman in question is not a real person. She appears in Supergirl #4, which comes out today. Relax, it's nothing bad. It's actually a good thing. So in this issue, Supergirl is more or less put in charge of her arch nemesis, Leslie Lar, and making sure that she stays reformed and doesn't do any supervillain type stuff. So naturally, Leslie becomes a superhero, luminary. And you know, I think I've said something about this before, but I really appreciate the fact that Leslie is drawn with a different body type than Supergirl and female superheroes in general. She's curvier, she has bigger legs, she might be a little bit taller than Supergirl too. I don't know if voluptuous is a word that's appropriate to use in this context, but she has a different kind of body than you're used to seeing on a female superhero. And I'm not even trying to comment on it in a sexual context. The context I'm using here is more about inclusivity. And you know what I also like is that Leslie's body type has not been commented on at all. They're not, you know, spotlighting it. It just kind of is what it is. It's a fact of life. You know, from a writing standpoint, this Supergirl series makes a much more frequent use of thought bubbles than you usually see in a modern comic book. That's interesting. It makes for a different kind of reading experience, that's for sure. You know, stories about Superman and Superman-adjacent characters like Supergirl have felt a little bit more moralistic in recent months than they have in quite a while. And that's kind of apparent in this issue as Supergirl teaches Leslie how to be a superhero. I'm wondering if they're doing that on purpose, or if I'm just noticing the moralistic things a little bit more because I enjoyed the Superman movie so much. Sophie Campbell, our author and artist here, really seems to enjoy kind of playing dress-up with the characters, not just in terms of Supergirl's different costumes, which we've seen in the series so far, but in this issue, our three female characters go to like a goth party, and so they dress up all gothic-like. It's fun, you know, no harm, no foul. I'm not gonna ramble about the Jimmy Kimmel story this morning, even though there's a part of me that really wants to. The only thing I'm gonna say is that it's very important for people to not just understand that his show was pulled from the air, but why his show was pulled from the air, and what that means, and what that sets a precedent for in the grand scheme of things. And you know, interestingly enough, this does kind of tie into the issue that was already on my agenda for this morning anyway. Captain America #3. So to reiterate, this story places Captain America's re-emergence from the ice in I think the early to mid-2000s, like during the conflict in the Middle East. And in this story, we've met a character named Dave Colton, who is essentially the modern-day super soldier. He carries Captain America's shield and kind of fights for the U.S. military. We see some flashbacks for him in this story and some of the trauma that he went through during the Iraq War and the conflict in the Middle East. And all the while, Steve Rogers, Dave Colton, and U.S. forces have infiltrated Latveria, which is Dr. Doom's home country. So naturally, that promises a conflict in and of itself. It feels like this issue does a nice job of conveying the everyday horrors of war and, what I'm sure many, many troops actually witnessed and experienced in Iraq and the Middle East. I don't know that for a fact. I didn't serve, but it feels like it's probably true. I'm really into Marvel's One World Under Doom story, which is one of their big event comics that's coming out right now. And even though this story is by a different author, it does feel like it is an interesting sort of tie-in with One World Under Doom, even though that's not officially the case. Because, we have scenes in this issue where Dr. Doom is showing Steve Rogers Latveria and how the people there are, thriving under Doom's dictatorship. And naturally, Steve Rogers comes back with the argument that it's prosperity and comfort at the price of freedom, which, rings true. And there's a panel in here where Dr. Doom says that America uses words like freedom and democracy to cover up the atrocities and horrors that it's culpable in. And that's kind of what made me think of the Jimmy Kimmel thing this morning. Not because what happened with him is such a horror and an atrocity, but, the fact that we continue to use words like freedom and democracy, but do we really understand what they mean? Or what they're supposed to mean? The Dr. Doom character really shouldn't be right about America as much as he is these days. When the story started, I was interested to see how Steve Rogers would come to the realization that he needs to stand for and represent not necessarily the American government, but American values and what they're supposed to be. And by the end of this issue, we kind of are getting into that territory. So I'm very curious to see what's next. Flow number 1. Oh boy. Flow number 1 is a comic book that's not afraid to go there. You know where I'm talking about. So this story is about a young girl who goes away to camp where she gets her first period. But because she's been homeschooled and hasn't necessarily gotten the right kind of education about what's going on with her body, she becomes susceptible to manipulation and hazing and bullying from other girls. And naturally, because this is a horror story, said hazing and manipulation has horrific consequences. So this story is clearly designed to play into the uneasiness that people, men in particular, have about, I'm just going to say it, period stuff. And, women's reproductive health in general, I guess. And, I can appreciate the gutsiness that it takes by all parties involved to tell a kind of story like that, because I think the visceral, immediate reaction that a good amount of people are going to have to this is, ew, why would you do that? But I think that's kind of the idea. I think this book is sort of designed to a large extent to make unenlightened dude bros uncomfortable and, push the boundaries of what people are comfortable with and what they normally read about. And that's one of the things that horror stories can do. And I like that sort of thing. I like stories that invite you to expand your mind and your perspective, and certainly Flow is a story that's uniquely suited for the world of indie comics, because I doubt that you'd ever see this from a major comic book publisher, and certainly not a major TV or motion picture distributor. It is a little bit Carrie-like in terms of the story. We've got a girl who's being hazed and presumably at some point will want to get back at the people that hazed her. The art in this book plays into the horror element really well. This is my favorite panel in the entire book. You know, your brain kind of goes over it thinking that nothing's wrong, and then it jumps when it sees the girl there. You know, I always appreciate elements of truth in stories like this. And, you know, the tragic truth is that there are a lot of girls and young women around the world who don't have access to proper education about what goes on with their bodies at that age. It's really sad and tragic. And this book very much plays into that and kind of comments on it in its own way. And as the father of 2 young girls living in a post-Roe v. Wade era, I can very much appreciate that. It takes a lot of guts to do a story like this in the current climate, so I'm here for it. Rook Exodus number 7 made me think of my mother. It really did. Just me? I mean, it didn't do it intentionally, I would assume. I'll explain in a moment. Yes, comic book readers, our long national nightmare is over. Rook Exodus is back from its hiatus with issue 7. For a variety of reasons, Rook Exodus was one of my favorite comics of 2024, and you're going to see why with this issue. Okay, so long and admittedly kind of complex story short, Exodus is a doomed planet that our heroes are now trying to save. And the thing about our heroes is that they're called wardens, which means they have technology that allows them to communicate with and control animals, basically. Like, for instance, Rook can communicate with and control birds. And in this issue, Rook and his companions are trying to locate Bloodhound, a character who can fix Exodus's broken world engine. Unfortunately, Bloodhound is insane, but, you know, I guess you work on one issue at a time. Artist Jason Fabok and colorist Brad Anderson. Those are really my only 2 selling points for this issue, and if you've seen the work that they do together, those are really the only selling points I need, I think. The detail that Fabok brings to the art on this book is so intricate. It's some of the finest comic book art I've ever seen, I don't mind saying that. And meanwhile, Brad Anderson's colors are pitch perfect. They're a textbook example, really, of how a great colorist can subtly add another layer to a story. Our opening scene for this issue is phenomenal. It's nice and lengthy, about 30% of the issue. We see Bloodhound attacked by another warden who can control deer, I think. The character's name is Stag, I'm pretty sure. And he's got a really interesting look. You know, the skull helmet with the antlers, and the red really pops. He's got the sword. And when I saw the Stag character for the first time, you know, I couldn't help but think of my mother, who I love dearly. But she's not always the best at grasping and wrapping her mind around comic book logic. So when I see the Stag character with the big antlers on his helmet, I can't help but hear my mother ask, how does he fit through a door? I mean, I wouldn't let him in my house. He'd be knocking things off shelves left and right. How does he even fit through a door? I don't know, Mom. He seems like an outside kind of character. I'm just saying, don't bring him over to my house. Yeah, okay, Mom, I won't. Seriously, though, the art in this issue just begs to be pored over and, like, studied. If for whatever reason you're only going to buy one physical comic book this week, make it this one. And while we're on the subject, folks, Jason Fabok is going to be on the Ghost Machine Fans podcast next week to talk about this issue. I'm not going to be on that episode, but I am going to be listening intently because I'm really curious to hear about his creative process and what he has to say. Next issue, Rook and friends meet Spider-Man. Not really, for legal reasons, but read the issue. You'll get the joke. Robin gets to drive the Batmobile in issue 2 of DC's new titular Batman series. he's also a victim of police brutality. So it's very much like a good news, bad news situation. So yeah, the police are a lot more authoritarian right now in the pages of Batman. Mostly because the GCPD is now under the control of Police Commissioner Vandal Savage. And in this issue, Batman and Tim Drake, Robin, find out just what the Gotham Police Department's new brand of justice looks like. So much like the Batman costume was kind of tweaked and retooled for this new ongoing series, Tim Drake's Robin costume has gotten the same treatment. It kind of looks like it looked on the new Batman adventures back in the late 90s. I've always liked that costume, so no complaints from me. There's a sequence in here where Robin, who has been shot and handcuffed by the police, gets thrown into the back of like a police truck with a bunch of bad guys, and he has to fight them off while handcuffed as the cops are kind of driving erratically. It's a really suspenseful, action-packed scene. I loved it. In terms of the real-world implications of this story, what with police brutality, criminal justice reform, that kind of thing, I'm not going to complain. It's certainly relevant as hell right now. In hindsight, I'm actually kind of surprised they haven't done something like this a little sooner. There's a panel in here that's just a straight-on headshot of Batman, and he's looking into the camera and he makes a statement about where he stands on police brutality. That's kind of refreshing in a PSA-ish sort of way, I guess. With a character like Batman, I think it can be easy for a certain section of the audience to forget that he's really less about the punching and more about the principles. He really stands for something. He has values. And this was a nice reminder of that. It kind of made me think of that classic Batman PSA panel where the character's basically doing the same thing. He's looking out at the readers and he's saying, don't believe those crackpot lies about people who worship differently or have different skin color, etc., etc. Same kind of vibe, only with a modern feel. Lots of people in this country have never read that panel. And it shows. People like seeing their superheroes team up and get along. They really do. I honestly think it gives people a warm, fuzzy feeling deep down inside. But on the other hand, people also like seeing their superheroes beat the piss out of each other. And we're bound to see a lot of that in DC's new event comic, DCKO, issue 1 of which came out this week. So our story here is kind of convoluted, but long story, kind of short. Darkseid, the godlike supervillain, is about to make his return to Earth. And in order to grant one individual celestial godlike powers to fight against Darkseid, various heroes and villains from the DC universe have to compete in a tournament against one another. The winner will presumably face Darkseid. So Scott Snyder is our author here. Scott Snyder is also the author of Absolute Batman, which is a book that I thought got too silly. So silly that it kind of ventured into stupid territory. And yes, I know a lot of people like Absolute Batman. Don't come after me. That's just how I feel. And when DCKO was announced, I had two big prerequisites for it in order for me to read it and get invested. Number one, we had to have a good reason that all these characters, many of which are heroes, are fighting one another. They can't just be fighting because. And number two, the story could not venture into that same so silly it's stupid territory. Thankfully, coming out of this first issue, both those prerequisites, both those rules are holding. We spend most of this issue explaining how and why all these heroes have to fight each other to be anointed the one to fight Darkseid. I mean, it's not the most thrilling issue from an action standpoint, but we're going to get a lot of action in the issues to come, I think. So I'd rather we just take care of this business up front, which is what this issue does. Javi Fernandez is our artist here. He does a really commendable job. I love this panel, which you might not hear a lot of people talking about. It's just Superman looking at his own reflection, and the word balloon is also inverted backwards, like mirror style. I think that's a really great touch. Bottom line, I think that Snyder and Fernandez and everybody involved here really did some solid laying of the groundwork for what could be a really fun project, as long as we don't get too far over the top, okay? And I'll be watching. You know, when it comes to Rook Exodus, issue 8 of which just came out, and the art specifically by Jason Fabok and colorist Brad Anderson, I feel like I've kind of exhausted all the good things you can say about comic book art. Like, I've given them all the compliments. And as such, weird, off-the-wall compliments might start to seep into some of these videos as we go through here. Like this one, for instance. Rook Exodus number 8 has art that's so richly detailed that it achieves an immersive quality that activates senses that it's not necessarily meant to. I could smell colors in this comic book. And here's the thing, I'm kidding when I say that, but only kind of. So in this issue, Rook and his cohorts are still looking for Bloodhound, who they think may know how to fix Exodus's broken world engine. He can save the planet with science stuff, basically. And in the process of following him, hunting him, searching for him, they wander into a big spider's nest. But yeah, as far as that like immersive quality is concerned, early on in this book, Rook and his cohorts are in like a winter setting as they prepare to enter the spider's nest. And, you know, the combination of how detailed the art is and Brad Anderson's just brilliant colors, I mean, made me feel the cold in that setting. You can almost hear the wind. There's an immersive familiarity to it that just activates your other senses. And of course, that rich, immersive detail when it comes to real-world type stuff naturally lends credibility to the sci-fi sort of stuff, like when they enter the spider's nest. This might be my favorite page in the book. You've got the characters rappelling into this vast, dark abyss, which has some natural suspense to it. And then on the right side of the page, you've got the shot of them progressively going down, and then the spider comes up. Again, great, like, thriller, horror, suspense type stuff. You know, it can be easy to get lost in the weeds sometimes with these vast, detailed sci-fi worlds. You know, Star Trek's, Mad Max, those kinds of worlds. And that's why I think from a writing standpoint, it comes in handy to keep the stories, or the early stories in those universes, pretty simple and easy to understand. And to his credit, our author Jeff Johns has mostly done that here. Like, you can break down this second chapter of Rook Exodus pretty simply, at least at this point, just by saying, like, they're looking for an insane man who might be able to save this dying world. Not the simplest premise in the world, but you get it. You can grasp onto it. But yeah, Rook Exodus really hasn't missed a beat since it's been back. If you're not picking this book up, I think you're missing out. Star Wars Han Solo Hunt for the Falcon number 3 has the distinction of being the only Star Wars story I've ever read that actually plays more like an episode of Shrinking. You ever see Shrinking? It's actually pretty good. It's the show that Harrison Ford does with Jason Segel on Apple TV. You know, in this issue, you could actually switch Chewbacca out with Jason Segel's character pretty seamlessly, I think. But yeah, as Han Solo and Chewbacca continue their hunt for the lost Millennium Falcon, We get a lot of heart-to-heart talks in this issue, both in the present day and via flashback. Han and Chewbacca, Leia and Chewbacca, etc. But it's not just the heart-to-heart talk scenes that make this kind of feel like a shrinking episode. It's also the fact that Han Solo looks and feels about as old as I've ever seen him. And I don't necessarily mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean, people age, and Harrison Ford actually aged quite gracefully. But in The Force Awakens, Harrison Ford still had that Clint Eastwood, Liam Neeson, Morgan Freeman type quality where he was still able to maintain his aura despite being much older. He still felt like Han Solo. The Han Solo that we see here kind of feels like Walter Matthau in Grumpy Old Men, both in terms of how he looks and what they have him saying and doing. I mean, it fits with the story that they're telling, so I can't say that it's inappropriate or whatever. I just think that the creators here might have overplayed that hand a little bit. Meanwhile, Chewbacca never ages. In any medium. Like, they could not have been bothered to put a single gray hair on his head in The Force Awakens. It still kind of is weird to me all these years later. I've been waiting a long time for a story like Wrestle Heist, issue 1 of which just came out. So I'm watching this book quite intently and with a lot of curiosity. So this issue is about a wrestler named Sterling Steele, who is intentionally injured, his neck is broken, during a big wrestling match at the whim of a dirty promoter to prevent him from going to work for a competing promotion. And as such, to pay off his resulting debts, Sterling teams with another retired former wrestler to steal a bunch of money from said crooked promoter. I've been a wrestling fan for, God help me, about 30 years now. And pro wrestling is such a unique beast in terms of business, sports, entertainment. I mean, it falls into various different columns. It's a hybrid of a lot of different things. And sometimes the backstage stuff, like the political stuff and the machinations of how the sauce gets made, is more interesting than what we see on television. And I've always thought that backstage kind of cutthroat, political, semi-shady pro wrestling environment would be a great backdrop for like a suspense, intrigue, crime story. And fingers crossed, that's what we're getting here with Wrestle Heist. There's a lot of explaining and kind of exposition early on in this issue by our author slash penciler Kyle Starks, as he kind of has to lay out for the reader what the rules of pro wrestling are, how the culture works. I think it comes off about as well as one could hope. I mean, the most important thing is that by the end of the issue, we care about Sterling and what happens to him, and that is indeed the case here. My big question coming into this issue was whether this kind of cartoony style would lend itself to the action and the really intense drama that we see at certain points here. Like, for instance, Sterling getting his neck broken during the match. I mean, that's a high-intensity moment. I think what we get here works pretty well. It certainly elicits the right reaction and emotion from the reader, or at least it did from me. I guess the moral of the story is don't underestimate the power of a good cartoon or a cartoony style. I'm not comparing Wrestle Heist here, but for instance, a comic strip like Calvin and Hobbes can really make you feel things. So yeah, if you're someone who has interest in both comic books and pro wrestling, as I very much do, I would highly recommend Wrestle Heist. So far, so good. By the way, hat tip to Kyle Starks for designing the cover to this first issue like the cover to an issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which I think is the only retro wrestling magazine that's still standing to this day.